Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this short-term rental advisory committee meeting. Um, I just want to let everybody know that Councilman Flynn and Buffy Guilfoyle both let me know that they weren't going to be able to join us today. Always appreciate when we get a heads up when folks aren't able to join. And let's just jump right in. Oh, for those of you who are new to the committee, my name is Alex Vidal. I'm a policy analyst here in the Department of Excise and Licenses. And if you have any questions about participating, feel free to email me. We always start off by letting everyone know that there's a public comment period at the end of the meeting. If you are on Zoom, you can raise your hand and we'll go ahead and call on you. Or if you're not on Zoom and unable to raise your hand, you can also email me and we'll call on you. Public comments are limited to 2 minutes, and we don't generally answer questions from the public. You can pose a question for the committee to consider, but usually that time is for us to get your input on issues that you would like to discuss or for the committee to know about. We always start with licensing and enforcement updates and some data there. Let's jump into that. So we've pulled data on the first of the month, and you can see here we've got actually 13 months of data from January to January. I left last January on there so you can kind of compare. The numbers in orange are renewals, and the numbers in blue are new applications for short-term rental licenses. You can see that there's been growth here from January to January. And if there are any questions or comments, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep moving through our data. We can jump into our conversation about agenda setting. So here we have new applications by month and year. We've got now a fifth year of data, starting back in 2019. That was a big year when we started gathering this data. And 2020 obviously saw a big decline from the pandemic forward, and then some recovery. And now we're seeing numbers that are starting to exceed previous years, both last year and this year. So these are new applications. And then these are renewal applications. So same type of data, but new and renewal. And just want to, yes.
I've got a quick question for you.
Sure.
Sorry, didn't realize that my camera wasn't on. So just a quick question about what this data tells us, right? So we see that the number of renewals is the largest we've seen. We see that our new applications are going up. And so I'm just curious, like, what is this then telling us, and how can we use that to help plan strategically moving forward?
Sure. So one of the things that this helps with is just overall trends, right? We can see whether it's going up or going down. We can see movement in a direction. In terms of overall numbers, I know that we're have hit numbers that we were seeing in 2019 and prior. So we've recovered the numbers that went down during the pandemic. But really this information is for the committee's benefit in terms of if you see trends or see numbers that look off or different or interesting to discuss. But generally it's just going to be the overall trend of are things trending up, trending down? Are we seeing big jumps in certain months? Kind of things of that nature. Overall, we're just kind of tracking the overall numbers of new and renewal applications in case we see some things like that. But even sometimes when we do notice, like for example, here in November, big jump in renewal applications. So that's a year out, a year after COVID started in March of 2020. See people are starting to renew their applications again. So you can see little things in the data. Try to not spend too much time on it, but it's really for the committee's benefit. We're also thinking about putting some of this data as public-facing data, so it would be accessible through our website. So that way, committee members or just members of the public who are interested can get this data directly off the internet that's updated in real time, so you don't have to wait, for the next committee meeting. So we are thinking about the usefulness of some of this data, and some of it's just has been tracked for a long time, and so we continue to track it, but we are considering revamping this to put this type of very basic data available for the public, or that you can access to the public, and then we would just not include it here in our presentation and focus on other numbers. I know the licensure rate is something that the committee's been interested lately. So does that answer your question, Councilwoman?
Yeah, I think so. Follow-up question to that then. So we've recovered 2019 numbers, as we can see here. Our numbers have gone up significantly. I've read several articles about how the Airbnb is dead and as a business model, people are going back to hotels. It doesn't appear from this data that you're showing us that that's the case in Denver. Is that correct? That based on what I'm seeing here then?
Well, those types of trends are a little bit beyond what we would be looking at, because I think total is maybe like 2,800, maybe even lower than that, 2,600, 2,500 range for our STR licenses here in the city. I've also seen some articles about the kind of oversaturation in the STR market in terms of there are more hosts than there are guests looking for places to stay. But it's really, trends and what's in fashion in terms of, there's a big jump in people are really interested in trying Airbnb and doing that vacation model, whether it's, higher end homes or folks looking to rent a condo for a business trip. So it really depends on just the types of needs that are out there. I wouldn't hazard a guess in terms of are people going back to hotels and abandoning Airbnb. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but we are noticing, there is more travel obviously happening now. So I in terms of like the big picture of short-term rentals, I don't know if I would lean one way or the other in terms of making big statements like that, but
I mean, I
yeah.
think what we can say from the data is that we're seeing, the gray bars are the pre-pandemic levels of new and renewal applications. And in 2022, that kind of lighter blue color, we were seeing significant increases on our renewals from pre-pandemic. And then even in just the first month of this year with the green, we're outpacing even last year. So, like Alex said, it's not great to hazard a guess, but I think what we can see in Denver is that we've got a pretty healthy, established STR community.
Awesome. Thank you
I
so
think-
much. Really appreciate that.
And Councilwoman Sawyer, the way I interpreted your question, and maybe Erica, it's a bit the way you answered it, is kind of what is the relevance of this data? What does it really mean? Not what do the charts show, which is if we're having higher levels of renewal, if we're getting what I would call almost like an attach rate, somebody always renews versus people are dropping off and not continuing in this business, or we're getting a lot of net new ads. People added a room to their home or an ADU, or they decided to rent a room in their basement. I think it would be interesting for all of us to sort of have, Erica and Alex, a boiled down version of how do we interpret this data, which is, I kind of thought, Councilwoman Sawyer, that was your question, is not just are the trends moving in one direction or another, but what do they tell us about our city and about short-term rentals in our city? And how does that compare? And that might be out of scope, but how does this compare to other, to other markets or other cities? And there's a lot more in today's agenda that kind of talk to those things, but it might be really interesting to look at this and what it's telling us really about the composition of our short-term rental host base.
Thank you for that. Both Susan and Councilwoman Sawyer, I really appreciate that input and that insight. So we will take a look at that and see what we can do for you and for us.
Great, thank you.
Sure. No, appreciate the question, appreciate the thoughtfulness. Again, standard data that we show here in the meeting is actually this was added a couple of meetings ago. This is the final disposition of applications for the last 12 months. So in the last 12 months, we've issued 2,496 licenses. So that includes new and renewal. So 93% of the applications that we received it resulted in a license being issued or renewed. And then about 21 applications, about 1% were denied. Another 67, about 2% were withdrawn, and then about 115 or 4% were administratively closed, and that's what happens if the application sits with, idle for a year with no action. So this is
Alex,
yes, absolutely.
quick
Hey, Cindy.
question. Can we say then that we have 2,496 viable short-term rentals in Denver?
So actually, this is going to give you the number of current
Okay.
licenses. Yeah, so this is the current number
Okay.
of licenses as of, I think I pulled this on January or February 1st. So in January, we had 2,689 licenses. So yeah, this is our current license number. And one of the things that it's hard to say is that I forgot what the phrase was, but attachment, whether it's folks that are renewing and we always have the same kind of population, we do know that folks kind of enter and leave this space at different times. And so we're not sure what percentage are consistently renewing. You know, they might do it for a year or two. So that's something that we could also look into and provide some data there. But what this gives us here is, again, the total number of licenses that we have in each month, and then also the total number of listings that we're seeing on the internet. So this first number here is the number of properties that we've identified in terms of we know the address for these properties. And then this is the number of listings where there's no address information that we can pull off the internet. So when we combine those two numbers, this is the total number of unique properties that we think are out there. It probably overestimates the number of unique properties because some of these postings that don't have address information might actually be double counted here. And so we can see it's been hovering around 80%. Give or take, 1 or 2%. This is, well above where we saw at the beginning of licensing, where it was, around 50% when we started tracking these numbers, and now, doing very well in the 80% range. And then, again, we cover 311 trends. So this is for the last 12 months here, and we can see we've been seeing this now for a number of years, where a lot of the questions that we're getting asked are about the application or just generally about the program. The notices of violation and property complaints are way down from in previous years. And then here, year over year, you can see big drop from number of percentage of complaints down to pretty steady at that 7% range. Then here we have lodgers tax data. So we have totals now for 2022. So a big year, 11.4 million in lodgers tax just from short-term rentals. That represents about 9% of the total lodgers tax that was pulled in, that was collected. And then so far this year, we've collected 816,000, which is again, steady around that 9-10% range of the STRs represent out of total lodgers tax. And again, I left last January on here, so you could take a look and see that there's been some growth as well in the lodgers tax collected, which makes sense. On to current events. So what's happening in the world of short-term rentals? So globally, we found an article that talked about trends that STR hosts and folks in this industry should expect in 2023. And I've got those listed in my notes here, just one moment. So those trends in the article are increased regulation. We've noticed that, especially in smaller communities that are just starting to address the short-term rental market in their communities. Growth in alternative accommodation, so that's things like tiny homes, yurts, caves, all kinds of interesting homes, facilities that folks are offering on these sites. Increased use of technology, whether that's to monitor noise or help with booking or other things. And then number 4, I wanted to highlight, which is an increased focus on sustainability. So the article talks about how over 80% of STR travelers, guests, are interested in staying in a STR that is sustainable. And so I know also talk about that later when we talked about some of the more popular topics that the committee wanted to discuss this year. One of them was sustainability. Again, with another trend is greater competition among hosts. So we talked about that just a little bit ago. And then continued growth. Says likely to be least affected if recession occurs. So even if there is a recession, I know that there's been some talk about that in the larger economic environment. The STR market, according to this article, is likely to be resistant to that recession, and so continued growth throughout this year. Also, this article from Florida Atlantic University about a study that indicated that the growth of unregulated short-term rentals in Florida has been contributed to high rents in Florida. So that's specifically about Florida. I know it's not global or national, but because they are an unregulated short-term rental market, wanted to contrast that with our approach here in Denver. Nationally, we've seen plenty of jurisdictions, especially some of the bigger ones that hadn't jumped onto licensing yet. So New York just adopted short-term rental licensing, and it includes a primary residence requirement. They had reached out to us about our programs, that we provided some information. This was early last year. Also Dallas, the Dallas Planning Commission rather has recommended to the City Council that short-term rentals have zoning requirements so that they be allowed in certain zones and not in others. And then Philadelphia has also adopted short-term rental licensing, and a number of jurisdictions in Arizona are adopting short-term rental licensing now that they can. Locally, we've seen that Summit is considering broader limits on short-term rentals than what they already have. Dillon is considering an increase to their short-term rental license fee. And then there was a study that documented the growth of short-term rentals in the Aspen area. So feel free to take a look at those. And then I wanted to provide an update on the new questions that have been added or will be added to the short-term rental application. So,
Alex?
yes.
Can I take you back to local developments?
Sure.
I was in a meeting with Mayor Adam Paul out of Lakewood last week, and apparently they're about to adopt short-term rental guidelines. Do you know anything? Is it going to be primary residence? What do you hear?
Well, trying not to share, ahead of time what other jurisdictions might be considering. Erica, do you have any information that we're able to share at this time, or?
I know they called and asked us some questions about how Denver works, but we haven't seen like a draft of their ordinance. But they said they would keep us in the loop on, when they do go to council, and if they do pass anything, they would kind of give us the overview. So sorry, I don't have more details on that, but we talked to a lot of jurisdictions, especially if they're adopting, for example, the platform accountability provisions, or they're looking into that, or if they're just getting started. We've talked all over about, how each jurisdiction needs to find what's right for them and what's right for their host community and their tourist community and their neighborhood. So as we get more information, happy to share.
Okay. I think they're open for comment right now on the Lakewood website. So maybe some of our hosts would be interested in taking a look at what they're proposing.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that. Yes, we've heard, grumblings here and there, but we don't like to say anything definitive until we see something. So thank you for sharing that there's opportunities for comment on Lakewood's ordinance.
Sure.
And so for our applications here in Denver, we added a question about detached and attached ADUs. What type of structure is it? What type of rental is it? Is it a home? Is it a condo? Are you renting just a room or your entire home? And so that was added a few months ago now, and we're have not reviewed the data yet. It's very early in the process, but after we get a few months, we'll be looking at that data. And then also we just finalized and approved the disability access feature question. So that's going to go over to our technology services and will appear on the STR application in late Q2 or early Q3. There's a freeze right now for our technology services and what we can change with our applications, and so that's why the delay in adding that question. But again, we're thinking that possibly disability access was another one of the topics that was popular for continuing to look at this year, and so we're thinking that might be good to revisit that later in the year when we might have a little bit of data to look at as well. Susan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick one. And Alex, this is probably for you and Erica. I've had a few hosts reach out to me as a part of the new application where they say there's not much area to create a write-in. So if they're asked in the form of a drop-down menu, what kind of structure do you have? Is it a home? Do you have an ADU? If you have an ADU, I'm making up the steps. Is it detached or attached? And I've had several hosts, maybe 4, indicate that there's not much area to try to explain their structure. If it's obvious and it's on the tax rolls as a duplex and they live in one part and that's what they're renting, then that is very straightforward. If they have a single family home with a staircase, they've just indicated that the software is quite limited and doesn't allow people to give any additional information to the city. I don't know if that's useful to you and Erica, but because it's been shared with me more than once, I think it's worthy of, letting you know about it and maybe having someone dig into it, Erica, to determine, is it true that there's just a really simple field? And if they don't fit in the right box right away, there might not be a place for them to try to, create a little bit of an explanation.
It is a drop down and you have to select the best option that fits you, right? And that's just to get some preliminary data, right? Like we've talked about on when people ask us what percentage of short-term rentals are in ADUs. We don't know.
Oh, I see.
And so I think there's different pathways. I can say that, right? Like it's a drop down that you select, but based on the answer you select, like for example, you can select, I'm not sure, I believe on one of the questions, and then it'll prompt you with some additional questions to try to put you in the right bucket. Just so we have an idea of, is it something that's detached? Is it something that's attached? And you don't necessarily need to know whether it's, classified as an ADU or a different type of structure. We're trying to come at it from different ways. So we think we've captured everything, but if there are situations that the questions don't capture, feel free to forward those. I don't know if they've provided you the information via email or what, but if you want to forward those emails or, compile them, we're happy to take a look and make sure that we're capturing all the different scenarios so that we have more robust data.
Great. I will share with you what's come my way. And maybe other hosts can tell you, because sometimes a host will reach out to another host and say, do you know how to do this? And in this case, I didn't actually know this had happened yet. So I didn't know how to answer the question. So this is really helpful. And I'll try to share anything that comes along where if your software is getting it, Erica, on the back end and funneling people to the right places, then maybe it's moot. But in the event that it doesn't properly allow you to classify someone, it might be worth knowing.
Yeah. And maybe what we can do is, again, we've got a technology upgrade freeze coming up, but maybe at a future meeting, we can just walk through the 2 new questions, right? The disability access feature question and the structure type question, and just kind of give everyone kind of a view of what it looks like. And, if you're not sure, or maybe folks who are like, I don't know how to answer this, we could kind of walk through what the questions are. I know we had provided some information on the structure type when we adopted that, but it was, I think, more of just like general and not the actual screens that they would see. So we can talk to our tech team about doing some screen grab flow options so that you all can kind of see that. And like I said, we just want to make sure we get everybody that is possible out there so that we can know what the makeup is. So
yeah, and master data is really key. So, knowing that you're doing it right, so that if you are classifying, you have people in the right buckets. So great.
Thank you for the thank you for the question, and thank you for jumping in, Erica. I'll just add to that we're obviously interested in those big numbers, the big trends. What are most people doing? We do want to be able to drill down and look at more specific situations. but just from a data perspective, it's one of the things that is sort of a rule of thumb when you're collecting data is drop downs and selections are really nice, and avoiding those write-ins are good, because when you're going to analyze data, it's hard to analyze those. If you have big numbers, those write-ins, if somebody writes something they capitalize it, another person spells it lowercase, another one person spells it differently, or writes a whole sentence or a paragraph, so that it's nice to have those common buckets. But we do want to make sure that we have all the buckets that are relevant. We do want to make sure people know how to answer the question. So anytime somebody's confused by a question, we want to know so that we can address that as well. So good conversation. I just wanted to raise that for the committee so that in the future, when we're looking at collecting data for things, we think about that as well, about can we turn make this into a drop down or a check the box type question, because that always helps with data analysis later on. Cindy, did you have a question?
I have a quick comment. I know a lot of people aren't familiar with zoning language, so I don't know if there's something you can put in a document that they see first that an ADU is and make a description of it.
We
Or
do
if
have,
it's-
if you hover over it, there's a little info box where you can see what we mean by that. And then, like I said, if you read that and you're not sure, you can always select I'm not sure, and then it will just ask you some guiding questions to put you in the right bucket, without knowing, like I said, what is the official zoning definition of your structure.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the questions. Appreciate it. And when we put the disability access question up, I'm sure we'll get questions about that as well, as we kind of fine tune that in terms of what the ADU, that was important that we had a link to the information that Erica just mentioned. And so we might need to create a page as well for the disability access question when folks have questions about what some of those terms mean. Right, and then also wanted to provide an update on the ADU task force. So they have completed their committee meetings and they've finished drafting their initial recommendations. They're now accepting public comments, so you can go online and provide public comments. That'll be through the 24th. Wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that. We've got about a couple more weeks of that. And then they're also having open houses. So the information for the February 9th open house is online. Last time I checked, the March meetings weren't on the web page, but they should be added on there. And if it's getting close to those dates and you don't have the information, just let us know. You can shoot me an email and I'm happy to provide that information. So on to the big topic of the meeting, which is setting our agenda for the year. Wanted to remind the committee of the values that have been that are part of the STRAC committee and that have been discussed regularly from the beginning, and that is protecting neighborhoods, supporting compliant hosts, and finding a regulatory balance. So we want to make sure that we're keeping those in mind when we're having discussions and building recommendations. And then our survey, these are the top 3 topics that were selected by the committee members, and that was tourism was the top item that the committee wanted to discuss. Disability access was number 2, and sustainability number 3. So just wanted to share the results of that survey with the committee. Thank you for those that have participated, and we'll jump into what about each of these topics the committee would like to discuss and when you'd like to discuss. So in terms of which issues should be discussed at this year's meeting, I wanted to provide some guiding questions to kind of start the conversation. So for tourism in the STR market, again, we want to make sure that we're staying within the scope of the committee. Are there any guest speakers that STRAC is interested in hearing from? So oftentimes the first step in developing topics and kind of thinking about what kind of work we want to do is to get information, right? What kind of research, what kind of information, and guest speakers are often a great way to get that information, get the conversation going. Some ideas for tourism. Obviously, we have members from Visit Denver here included on this committee, and the Colorado Hotel and Lodging Association, also part of the committee, but wasn't sure if you were interested in hearing from those folks, or if there were other, individuals or groups that you were interested in hearing from. And so I'll just go through these questions, and then we can, I'll just open it up to kind of an open conversation at that point. But so then, what about tourism in particular, related to short-term rentals? Would STRAC like to learn about or discuss? So think about what you want to know and who you want to hear from, and then what you want to talk about and potentially do related to tourism. Disability access. So we've talked about this last year a number of times, a number of the meetings. What additional resources should STRAC make available? So we've presented some information from Rentable and Lorraine. We've now started to collect some data. We're going to start collecting data on this. We did talk about a grant approach. I think that one of the issues there is being able to track how that money is used and making sure that it's actually being used for an SGR and actually benefiting folks that have a disability, and that's kind of a sticking point there. But we also talked about education, right? Where and how can we educate the community? I know that Dana's group has done some work there. They had Lorraine do a presentation as well, and so whether there's some partnerships that we can do in terms of educating the short-term rental community or the guest community, the traveling community, about opportunities here in the city of Denver. So I'm thinking about that. So what other resources, can we provide, and then what other information or approaches is the committee interested in discussing? And then finally, sustainability in the short-term rental market. Again, want to make sure we're talking about in the short-term rental market. Are there any guest speakers that STRAC is interested in hearing from to get the conversation going? We have, our office here of sustainability, but there may be other groups outside the city that the committee is interested in hearing from. And then again, are there specific issues within sustainability that STRAC is interested in discussing? So I'll open it up to conversation for the committee. Feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get going here. And Susan, you have your hand up?
Yes, I just had a couple thoughts. One is the ADU area that Abe and team have worked on, and the recommendations that you highlighted that are coming, and I know council will have a large role in all of that. I think that's very interesting to STRAC and to, in general, the host community. So I would love to see that be prioritized. I realize, Alex, there are other opportunities, like people can go to open houses or participate online. And I read through all the documents you attached and posted on the website. But I think there's increasing interest, particularly in prospective hosts deciding whether or not they may build an ADU. So I think that is of great interest. Another area that's not one of the three that you've highlighted, although it may be kind of embedded in this broader tourism kind of landscape. I think Alex April from Airbnb may be on this call today, but I think hearing from the platforms about the industry and how it's shifting, the kinds of questions that Councilman Sawyer asked at the beginning, I'm hearing there's a glut, much of the press about, during COVID, people buying vacation homes, second homes, how has that impacted the short-term rental market? And does it or does it not have relevance as it relates to our market? I feel like STRAC can benefit by being far more deeply engaged in what the short-term rental model may become over time and how that could be relevant in the way we think about our market in Denver. So those are the things that I think we've done a good job of the early steps in disability access. And while that remains a very major priority, I don't know how much more we need to focus on it as a specific topic versus others that we could go deeper into and that may matter more in the near term in the next year to our short-term rental landscape in Denver. So those are, and I can email this to you and Erica, I'm happy to do that, but maybe others, since there's lots of hands raised, are going to have other suggestions.
Thank you for that input. Appreciate it. So yeah, I'll just let the committee keep discussing here and respond to the topics on the survey agenda or what Susan just raised here as possibilities. So it's in your hands, folks. You let me know. You let us know what you're interested in, and we'll go from there. Councilman Sawyer.
Thanks, Alex. Susan and I are clearly on the same wavelength today, because I was going to ask a very similar question. And I do think it would be helpful to hear from Visit Denver and from our hotel association. I'd like to know more about what they're seeing in terms of, and hearing in terms of trends from visitors when it comes to our short-term rental market, right? So are people happy with it? Are people, mentioning any challenges? What sorts of feedback are they getting from users? Are they, are they seeing that our short-term rental policies and program are beneficial to the city? Where are there unintended consequences we might be seeing that they would make recommendations would help our, tourism industry recover? Those kinds of things. I think it'd just be helpful to know. I agree with Susan that we have an opportunity to look more at the short-term rental market as a whole, in terms of the trends of what we're seeing. And I think it would be valuable for us to hear from the experts within the city of Denver, how they are seeing and hearing that short-term rental market play out in our city, and how we might be able to, tweak things or take advantage of things in different ways to be more successful and to support our good hosts better. And so I would just build off of what it was said earlier by Susan in those kinds of questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So sounds like we have pretty robust support for tourism and getting information from Visit Denver, the Colorado Hotel Lodging Association, and Airbnb as well. I know that means a little bit more work for some of the folks on the committee, but I think that I agree. I think that would be really great to hear from them and hear all of those trends, that bigger picture, so we can be strategic in how we approach this topic. So yeah, go ahead. Cindy, I think you're next.
I'd like to know a little bit more about how our guests get around the city, transportation. So I'd like to know if Visit Denver has any information, or if our hosts do, and whether people prefer mass transit, their own auto, or rideshare companies. As Denver gets harder and harder to get around in, does that demand that they stay in certain areas in Denver? Or are there trends that they could stay in other places outside the central area of Denver? And, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a great question, and that's exactly what we're looking to get, is what within tourism is important. So that's a really great question, and I would jotting this all down. Go ahead.
And I have one more. This is neighborhood specific. We've just instituted trash recycling on a grander basis, and that means more of the barrel containers in the neighborhood. And I wondered from the hosts if this process is starting to hinder people from getting into ADUs, a parking space on trash collection days, a back unit, anything like that. And also if there are, now that we have weekly trash recycling and being picked up, if that's helped some of the trash issues in the neighborhoods, and also parking with all of those containers out there. I know some neighborhoods are stressed, but I don't know if it's the ones where short-term rental hosts are having to deal with this. That's sort of a micromanaged issue, but I just wondered how that turned out in neighborhoods.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that input. Dana?
Thanks, Alex. So what I'd love to see, and I don't know if it fits as in this bucket, but I think it's a pretty big topic with short-term rentals. While we say the primary residence requirement ensures that our short-term rental inventory does not impact housing affordability, we still have a housing affordability crisis or access crisis in Denver. and across the nation. And I think it would be really helpful to have someone from HUD or some housing expert come and speak to the group a little bit to talk about what Denver is doing. You know, I know last year we passed or Biden passed the Housing Supply Action Plan. And I'd love to know a little bit more about what Denver is specifically doing to garner some of those grants and funds, and if it possibly could help us better understand what we're dealing with from a housing inventory shortage here in our city, just to kind of set some of these narratives straight, because I do hear these often spoken as though it is a direct correlation between short-term rentals and housing affordability. And I think it would be great to have an expert come and speak to us all. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, important topic. We've covered it, but it continues to be an important topic. We want to make sure that we're staying informed and making sure that we're being responsive to needs. And so great topic for us to discuss as well. Alex?
Hey, thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself since I'm new to the committee. So my name is Alex April, and I'm a senior policy manager for Airbnb. And I'm actually based out of Colorado Springs. So definitely want to be a resource, and completely hear what you're saying, Susan, and Councilmember Sawyer as well. So we'll make sure to huddle internally and try to get some information for you all. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you. We'll keep going here. Dana, did you? Okay, Susan?
I did raise my hand again. Promise it'll be the last time, because I've heard a lot from me. You know, this is maybe, Erica, just a broader set of thoughts. I think one of the things we did well as a STRAC organization and committee in the beginning was we were very involved in the kind of evolution of short-term rentals in Denver, process changes, communicating those, being advocates in the host community, those of us who are part of the host community. And I just would love to see our mission continue to be one of action and engagement. And my broader sense is over the last few meetings, there's a bit more of sort of a readout orientation and a little bit less engagement. And I think we have such great people representing such different backgrounds that this is a real opportunity for the richness of this group to impact Denver in a favorable way. And I wanted to share that. It's not because anyone isn't doing the right thing or doing their job in the way that it's been defined, but it's just how it feels. And I don't know if Cindy or others who've been involved for a long time as well, you know, maybe it's just my observation, but I think with some of the ideas that we're sharing, maybe it creates that level of, you know, engagement and enthusiasm about, you know, just because we have a landscape that is solid and is working doesn't mean there aren't a lot of things we should be considering to continue to be a really forward-looking city. And I have a little bit of concern that, you know, we don't want to just sort of be a group of inactivity. And I guess that's the best way I can articulate it, other than reporting out, you know what I mean, on what's happened in the past and certainly current events. And it isn't anything that the team isn't doing an exceptional job of. It's a high caliber team. It's just about the feel of what we can create here.
And I'll just chime in and say thank you for that, Susan. I mean, we are here to provide support and provide the space about the topics this group wants to talk about. So if you all have more action-based goals and things that you want to plan to do this year, right? I mean, I think, you know, we are here to provide that support. For the disability access conversations we had last year, right? We heard that data collection was key, and that data would be key to, you know, informing any future policy decisions. So we've got, you know, the data question in the works, right? Same thing on the structured question. So, you know, if you've got ideas about specific actions that we want to take, I think, you know, that's kind of the goal of these questions, right? What actions does this group want to take? What programmatic features would you like to see? I mean, I think, you know, we did some work in the early days around standing up the program, right? And seeing how do we, I mean, our number one question was, how do we achieve compliance? And how do we make any tweaks to the original ordinance based on how this is working? And so a lot of our data readouts told stories that informed the choices we made. And so if there's new data that you want to see, I mean, even the question of, what's the average tenure of a licensee, right? Do they do this and after 3 years they stop, or once they, are renewed for a year, they're pretty solidly in the community? So I think that's a great additional data point that would inform, some additional programmatic features in the future, and kind of lead us to discoveries of additional ways we can improve. So I just dropped it in response to someone's question, but anyone on the call, if you've got specific ideas or specific answers to these questions, especially the members of the committee, we would love to hear all of that, because it helps us build meaningful agendas, right? It helps us have meaningful discussions. And so the more information we get from you, the better we can use this time together to, like Susan said, be action oriented.
That's great, Erica. Thank you. And are you guys seeing the notes in the Q&A? Will someone just answer them online or comment on them, like the security issues around the 16th Street Mall, those kinds of things?
I've been trying to answer as we go while also paying attention. So
perfect. No
dropping
worries.
Answers here and there where I can.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for all that input, hearing you loud and clear, and we appreciate the positive feedback and the feedback about where the committee wants to go in the future in terms of being more action oriented. So really, really appreciate it. Lots of notes here that we're taking. Does anybody else have their hand up or would like to speak about tourism in particular? We've got a lot, it seems like robust interest there and a lot of subtopics within that we could explore, some guest speakers. And we've talked about disability access. What about sustainability? I wasn't sure if anyone on the committee had kind of specific thoughts there about what they're interested in looking at or learning about. Any discussion there?
Alex,
Susan.
if nobody else jumps in, there were a couple comments written in the Q&A about what do we mean by sustainability. And so however we frame it, I think there is a lot of interest. I mean, Airbnb, for one, Alex can comment, is putting a lot of time and effort into sustainable homes. And that can include anything from the supplies you have, compostable, plates, and those, to how the home was designed with sustainability in mind. So I think maybe the most critical thing is that we think about how do we want to define this big category of sustainability, and then, have people jump in with how to build that agenda, how to have, you and Erica help us with what are the key sustainability topics that would be appropriate to a short-term rental. Because I think people view it differently. Everything from having a power wall and, having, energy supplies that are different than core electricity. So it really, I think we have to kind of boil it down to how we want to define it in order to do a quality job of hitting the target, maybe. I don't know if anyone else has a comment on sustainability, but I think kind of making sure we're all aligned with its definition would be good.
That's an excellent point. Where we're looking at electricity and conservation, we're looking at, like you said, a power wall or electric vehicles or gas versus electric stoves. I know that that's a touchy topic right now, but within sustainability, what are we talking about? Transportation. The question that was raised earlier about how do folks get around when they're here, when they're traveling, right? So when we start talking about tourism, that might actually help us also identify some of the sustainability components, right? Trash and recycling, things of that nature. So that's a great point. Did anybody else want to weigh in on sustainability here at this point?
And just, I didn't raise my hand, but just to jump in for efficiency's sake.
We're all friends here.
For sustainability, I mean, the most common thing people think of is environmental. But the reality is sustainability can be the future of short-term rentals within our own community as a lodging option for guests that travel to our city, which does tie into tourism. But I think again, getting clear. And if we were going to really go, electric, power grid, energy efficient, environmental, really make that designated, because the role I play in the community, I think more of, how do we create sustainable communities for short-term rentals to coexist amongst other housing and lodging options. And so maybe they're both worth exploring, and we can leave the topic broad so we can talk about some of the more nuanced things that may relate to, the viability of it as part of our ecosystem.
Another good point. Well, it sounds like we've got some real interesting topics and things that we can start out with. I think we've got plenty that we can build out for our next meeting, for example, around tourism and guest speakers and getting information there, which will help inform us, moving forward into the sustainability conversation as well. So I think we've got plenty here to work with for our next meeting, and then as we learn in that meeting, as we discuss, as ideas are brought up and discussed, we can look at planning for that next meeting out as well. Anyone else? I want to make sure that there's plenty of time here for folks that have not had a chance to speak up. If you're nervous or shy or not quite sure what you want to say, you want to make sure that you do have an opportunity to share your thoughts. Or perhaps some of the other speakers did such a great job, discussing these topics that were covered.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's not necessarily related to 2023, but one of the questions about data privacy triggered this thought for me. So I'm part of a larger national organization called Rent Responsibly, and I work with hosting communities around the country, but I also am a founder of the Mile High Hosts here in Denver. And some folks are bringing up the question about calendar requests and screenshots, and we've chatted about this before. But just they had said, one of the questions was, why are they asking me for my calendar when they can just go to Airbnb and get my calendar or Vrbo? And my understanding is there's a Data Privacy Act, which may be tried in the House or in the Senate this legislative session. But just so we can set the record straight, the city isn't going to Airbnb and then also asking hosts to provide that same data and then also using the software as well. Like, hosts are just wondering if there is a reason that they're being asked to send those screenshots in addition to the data they already have access to. But I was just hoping you guys could state what the facts are for the public.
Absolutely. We've been told by Airbnb that they cannot share that information with us. So if they could share it directly, that would make our jobs a lot easier. But they've said they cannot. So that is how we get that information.
So it's not from the booking platforms.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Erica, did you want to make any final comments here on the agenda setting? Again, I think we've got a pretty robust group of topics here that we'll cover in our next meeting, and that'll help us inform meetings after that. But
yeah, I mean, I think to Susan's point earlier, I do want to, kind of circle back again and say, I know we used to have a much more detailed task list, right? And I think that was necessary at the time, right? Of course, right? Like, how are we going to inform people? We're going to make a website. We're going to create a bulletin. We're going to, we had some easy wins and some low hanging fruit that were easy to identify. These discussions are much more complex and they're much more mature, right? They're much more characteristic of an industry that has grown and solidified itself, and it's not new anymore, right? It's how do we innovate within an existing industry, which is a totally different question than how do we stand up a license. And so I think your question is well taken and your observations are right on point, because I think we too are trying to, like I said, ensure that this is a productive space where people are having productive conversations and about actionable items. And so the discussion doesn't stop here. This is just kind of, our first meeting of the year, so it's a good time to do goal setting. But at any time, if anyone has kind of these ideas about, like little side groups that want to study something and present, right? If, Dana's group or other subgroups that are represented on the committee want to talk about, here's some data we collected. I know Dana shared like Good Neighbor Summit information, right, from participants about their circumstances or their situations, right? That's all helpful to everyone else to hear. So free license to brainstorm and think about what can we share, what other groups can we tap into, because otherwise it just gets stagnant, and then what's the point? But that doesn't mean we can't continue to have again, I always think about, and I always use this example, the complaint notification system, something so simple, right, where because it was a new program, we were just trying to think about all the different features it could have. And one of our hosts in the audience said, hey, if I get a notice that there's a trash complaint, I can handle it. So can you please notify me? And it was like, yeah, duh, that's a great idea. So we did it. And now we have, after that, we see very few complaints, because usually once the host knows, they handle it and then it's addressed. So even just little things like that make a huge difference, like Dana said, in the sustainability of the model in the future of short-term rentals. So just wanted to wrap up by reiterating all of that and thank everyone for the really thoughtful brainstorming here.
Yes, lots of good ideas. As Erica mentioned, this is becoming a more mature, much broader, more complicated topic. Early on, we were setting up the program and kind of troubleshooting and adopting best practices. It's nice to hear that our program is in a good place now, and we can look at that broader agenda, broader topics, and looking at things strategically. But to Susan's point and Dana's point and everybody else that's spoken, being action oriented and looking for actions that we can take to make a difference. So based on the learning that we're doing here. So, all right, final call for any pushback on things that have been raised here, or additional topics, or more support, or more subtopics here. Speak now or forever hold your peace. No, I'm kidding. If you, later on, we're always open to agenda topics, so feel free to email us. I know, as Erica mentioned, we do have a subcommittee structure as well, where if you're a group of individuals on the committee want to get together and discuss something, you can form a subcommittee. So we're here, we're ready, we're available, and eager to help out with those conversations and just help structure things and move them forward and bring it to the larger committee. So even after this meeting, we do want to be strategic and thoughtful. So obviously our next meeting, I think, will focus on tourism. I think that was made clear here from folks that spoke up, and we've got lots of subtopics here. So raising something at the last moment, we might not be able to discuss it in the next meeting, but we can plan for that in subsequent meetings. So please reach out, please email us, please stay in contact with each other and with myself and Erica as you think of things, so that we can continue to build out our agenda here and think about actions we can take and topics we can discuss. Susan?
Alex, I don't know if this is something you and Erica are thinking about, because it's an adjacency, but we're sure getting a lot of questions around the long-term rental model in Denver, meaning, licensing, inspections, et cetera. So that might be a really great topic. It just dawned on me in the moment. And I don't know, Erica, is that going to be managed by excise and licenses? So does it fit in your wheelhouse, or is it going to be outside?
So the residential rental license program is required to be administered by excise and licenses. So it is our department. It's a totally different program. So I think what we could do is have that program manager maybe come give an overview, maybe some commonly asked questions, especially as they relate to short-term rentals. I just answered one in the chat. You know, if you're short-term renting, you need the short-term rental license. If you are renting for periods of longer than 30 days at a time, you'll need that long-term rental license. And if you want to do a mix of both, you can get both. They're separate applications, they're separate licenses, and there's nothing that says you can't switch from one to the other at any given time. You just need to have the proper license. So yeah, I think that's a great, I'm not sure where it fits, but we can certainly have some time carved out. And maybe what we can do is rethink some of the topic scheduling and we have some of our partner agencies or partner programs, right? Because these are all separate programs that are not short-term rentals, but they are related to short-term rentals. So maybe having an update on the ADU project from zoning, maybe having an update from our program manager on the RRP, et cetera, kind of having some of those experts tap back in and kind of, give their update, and then also talk about, if you're really into this particular topic, here's, it may not be on the STRAC agenda at every meeting, but here's all these other meetings that are happening, or here's this particular program or group that you can get involved in. For example, I know like the ADU infill project and things like that.
Erica, I think that's excellent because you pointed out all the questions that are the what ifs that people are asking. You know what I mean? If this, not this, you know what I mean? So I think it's not a forever topic, but one that's relevant maybe in the near term as it launches, like as an example, this longer term rental model. So that's great. And maybe we've filled up our agenda for the next few quarters.
Oh yeah, plenty to discuss. Wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing the things that, majority of the committee is interested in, and, because we do have to prioritize there, that we have got a limited number of meetings and quite a number of things that folks are interested in. So we want to make sure that we use our time well, so that we can take those actions based on what we learn in these meetings. So I just want to thank everybody for their input, really thoughtful questions, really thoughtful ideas. So we will take all of these notes that we've jotted down here and work on our next few meetings. Right.
And also I will note that if you dropped like a comment in the question and answer box, or something that is a rhetorical question, like, can we add something to the agenda? We'll add those to our notes as well. So if I'm not answering that, we are still taking those notes, just so you know.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that we have to tag team this because it's hard to do the presentation and answer the questions at the same time. So. All right. So that concludes our main discussion for setting up our agenda for this coming year. Again, as Erica mentioned, we are looking at the comments there in the chat box and answering questions and adding those to our notes. Just a reminder here that our next meetings will be May 9th, August 8th, and November 14th. It's looking like May 9th is going to be around tourism. And then a number of topics around housing too that were discussed that might be related to whether it's the impact on housing, ADUs, guest speakers from Host or HUD, the long-term rental program, things around that. And then in November, maybe looking at sustainability and returning to the disability access question. But again, we'll know more when we meet on the 9th and have those discussions about the broader topics that might give us some insight into what we should focus on moving forward. And again, another reminder, we're always open ears for input. So please stay in touch. Also want to allow time here for public comment as well. So that we'll turn to our public comment period, and let me get a timer going. And then look over at our participants. Let's see, okay, we've got Alex Dodd has got his hand up, and then Heather. So we'll have Alex start. Alex, can you hear us? Or can you take yourself off mute?
Hey there, can you hear me, guys?
Yes, Alex, go ahead. You've got 2 minutes.
Awesome, thank you. First of all, just a big shout out to the whole committee. Thank you for continuing your efforts and making the time today. I have 2 questions. I hope the first one's a quick one, and I think Erica already answered it for the most part in the chat. I just wanted to re-clarify. If a tenant is planning to short-term rent, as in they are not a property owner, but they're renting their home, but they would like to short-term rent it, it's their primary residence, does that specific parcel or property need to be licensed in both the residential licensing program because there is a monthly tenant there, and also would that tenant need to both hold an STR permit? Would both of those permits be required?
Yes. Okay. So that's an extra layer that I missed. So thanks for that question. The owner of the property who is long-term renting the property to the lessee would need to get the residential rental license, the long-term rental license. So the landlord would need to get it, the property owner.
So that property would need 2 permits for those 2 specific uses?
Yes, they would just be issued to different people because then the tenant is going to be the primary resident and they're the ones that would get the short-term rental license.
Perfect.
So.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And then my follow-up question is, we're sharing a lot of comment of current topics, and I know a lot of this is just kind of relevant because of the STR industry, but like updates from Summit County, updates from Steamboat, and a lot of these other communities. I understand that these communities are in Colorado and therefore there's a relevance to them, but I think we can all agree that the housing stock and the needs and the demographics of these communities is tremendously different from Denver. So I'm wondering if I guess my most pointed question would be, is there a city or municipality or region that Denver is looking to model their short-term rental licensing program? Is there like a city or a community that's just got short-term rental licensing down in terms of what the city sees, kind of a comparable city that we're modeling these things after? Or are we really looking towards some of these mountain communities that have roughly 30 times per capita the amount of short-term rental to them as a licensing framework to model after?
So I will say, and this kind of touches on a question Dana had asked or a point she had brought up about housing stock and affordability. We do have a request to, I know a few years back we had a study done about short-term rentals impact on housing stock affordability. We've asked for an update on that, in their spare time. But we would like to see, right, as, it's been several years since the pandemic now, and just kind of reassess and make sure that we have the most up-to-date data to rely on. So we're excited and hopeful that we can maybe see something like that this year. I will say that nationwide, the National League of Cities has referred to Denver as one of the models, one of the model cities. We have one of the highest rates of compliance in the country. I think we have a really robust host community who cares and who has professionalized incredibly rapidly. And I think a lot of cities are not there yet, or they're just starting, or, for example, in Arizona, up until recently, the localities had no option to tailor their licensing programs between, for example, resort or vacation towns versus towns that, struggle with stock and affordability. So I think, not to dodge the question, but I think it's difficult to say because we are so frequently referred to nationally by other jurisdictions who are asking questions about how do I even get started? And we've got a pretty mature market. But obviously, if we have any other additional insight into that, Alex can do some research and maybe we can report back next time if there are other different model cities that we can talk about.
And follow up, I know we're running out of time, but is there an anticipated time frame that we can expect the updated study from? Because if I'm not mistaken, the last one was from 2017 or so.
It was 2019. I don't have a timeline. It's kind of as they have time, and there are other priorities, especially as you all know, there will be a mayoral and council election this spring, and so trying to wrap up some projects for the mayor, and then obviously prepare for the new administration. So I would be it would be irresponsible of me to give a timeline.
I understand. So in absence of that updated study, considering that's the most up-to-date and the most relevant to our locality, would that be the best study to be kind of considering when making policy and kind of the current state of STRs then?
That's currently the standard. It's the most recent data. So, and it's good data for the STR industry. We continue to use it until and unless we are going to, be provided with additional data.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Heather, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. I'll go ahead and start your time. You've got 2 minutes, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you all. I am a full-time Colorado resident. I am from here. I have a restaurant business here, based here. And I file my tax returns as such. I vote here and I'm engaged with my community. I am a host as well. My other primary occupation is as a classical singer. I travel extensively for my work. I may be gone for a couple of days to do concert engagements, or I may be at an opera house doing a full-blown production. It is part of my job, or I may be having to go audition. I did not have any work during the pandemic as many things were shut down. Last year was the first time I was able to re-engage, and I rented my space a lot because I took every job I could, not only because I hadn't had income and had been relying on my savings so much, but because I had a struggling restaurant business that I was trying to keep afloat and pay and employ people. So for me, my short-term rental is a lifeline, an absolute lifeline, and has been. My dates and times away from home vary. I short-term rent for a few reasons. Number one, to safeguard my property when I'm away. I don't want my house vacant and empty. I have amazing neighbors who I'm very close to, who are very supportive of what I do, but I don't want my house vacant. So I short-term rent with the caveat that it's short-term because I may be able to come home for 3 days and sleep in my own bed and not a long-term hotel. That is not a home. I also do it to cover the financial burden of having to pay for duplicate housing spaces often. So I have my home in Denver that is my primary and my home, but if I'm away, I may have to supplement. And if I'm lucky enough to not stay in a hotel, maybe I get to short-term rent from somebody for a little while I'm doing a job. I am now pending with my renewal for over 2 months. And I called and I spoke to someone and they said they have up to 90 days to respond because I had a lot of days where I was out. And I'm sorry to see that there are not many more people who are able to speak today from the host community because many are afraid. They are afraid they're going to be blackballed or targeted. And that is really sad because I don't think that's the kind of relationship we should have with our community and with the city. I also, when I spoke to the person at EXL, I explained to her, I travel a lot. This is not me just not caring about where I live and always wanting to come home. It's the best part of my experience is coming home. Well, maybe the applause, but then coming home. And she said to me, well, you're just a nomad. You don't have a primary resident. And that hurt me deeply because I invest in this city. I volunteer. We have a homeless mission in the city. I engage with my neighbors. And I think I would be the best kind of STR host, someone who cares about their city, even if I'm traveling away. And it doesn't matter if I'm gone for 3 nights or if I'm gone and it adds up to several months out of a year. We don't have a maximum nights limit on our applications, but they are being counted, and I'm told that it's suspicious and they don't know if I qualify as having a home or if I'm a nomad. I am not a nomad. I love my home. And I need to know how the current short-term rental rules apply to my situation. So that's my one question that I would like people to talk about it, because I'm the kind of host I think people would desire. I love and engage and build my community, even when I'm on the road. And when I come home, it is my home. It doesn't matter how long I've been gone. It doesn't matter how many nights out of a year. Last year was extreme because I hadn't worked and I needed the job and I needed to pay my employees who needed their jobs. I'm hoping to, fortunately I was only gone 4 days this past month, but yet I'm still pending after a couple of months. The time is excessive. I also will just say, and then I'll close, that the change in 2020 of the definition of the primary resident which was, return of housing with your motor vehicle, driver's license, voting, etc., to what it is now, where it says a person's habitation is fixed and the usual place of return. It was changed and made more vague, which allows for less transparency, which really goes directly against the city's promise of having transparency access to information about what's really happening. And it makes it harder for people like me who love our community and engage in our community, even if I'm on the road, to feel confident that I'm complying in the way that needs to be done to continue to build a responsible, a positive STR host relationship with our community that does nothing but build our city. So back to my one question is, I do need to know, how does the short-term rental rule apply in my situation? I understand there may not be response now, but please take that into consideration for people like me. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We appreciate your comments, and I know that the committee appreciates your comments as well. In terms of individual situations, that's feel free to email me. My email's there on the screen, and we can talk more about your situation and discuss it that way. But we want to say that we appreciate your comments and glad that the committee's able to hear them. I want to make sure that everyone that's signed up to speak has a chance to speak. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more folks that want to speak. So we'll jump to Matt. Matt, are you able to take yourself off mute? Matt, can you hear us?
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry for that. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, and we'll give you some time to speak now, and your 2 minutes start now. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. I was in the question area and it would not let me unmute. So I appreciate that. I'll make it very brief, and I couldn't have asked for a better prior fellow host. I've been hosting for approximately 9 years and travel extensively as well for work. I also have the benefit of potentially accommodating myself in other properties that family friends have, also on site at my primary residence, which I've owned for approximately 20 years. I applied in 2021, 2022 timeframe for the renewal of my license and provided the calendar information requested, waited, understood that, during the pandemic, staffing limitations are to be understood. But it's a very similar situation, but yet slightly more frustrating, because after a year of waiting, my license was renewed in August of 2022 with an email subsequently a few hours later telling me that the license had already been, unfortunately, expired and I needed to apply again for renewal. So I did such, and that timeline was within hours of receiving the renewal, then yet next subsequent email outlining that the renewal, as far as that particular license, hey, that license had already expired and was never valid. And so renewal is kind of probably not an accurate term for describing what had occurred. And so I went ahead and applied again for renewal, and I'm still waiting. And then I was told I was officially denied. Now, in the meantime, I've accommodated frontline workers, whomever that I can basically try to accommodate over the limit of the short-term rental, meaning more of a longer-term rental. So I think that more clarification regarding professionals who travel extensively and maybe a disconnect regarding the calendars should be addressed within the clarifications for primary residency, as well as, I think, in general, what happens if something is not administratively closed out and probably shouldn't be renewed. I'm, understanding that there's a lot of work to be done within the excise and license department, and I look forward to representing myself and maybe working with any other hosts as to how to accurately provide discovery for my hearing so that I can continue to accommodate those on a short and longer term basis. So that's it. I know that's probably almost at 2 minutes, but I really appreciate your help.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. We appreciate your comments here. And again, we'll be taking those comments into consideration and looking to see what we can do. And then again, glad that the committee is able to hear these comments as well. Next up, we have Joshua. Joshua, are you able to take yourself off mute? Joshua, are you there? Joshua, can you hear us? Are you able to take yourself off mute? It doesn't look like Josh is going to be able to speak today, but Joshua, if you could, if you are still interested in providing comments, you can send written comments to my email. It's right there on the screen. So hopefully we can hear from you that way. So the next in line, we have Stephanie McCutcheon. Stephanie, are you able to take yourself off mute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Stephanie, and your 2 minutes will begin now. And just want to let the committee know that Stephanie did provide written comments that were shared with the committee when I sent the agenda and PowerPoint out ahead of the meeting on Friday. Stephanie,
Okay.
go ahead.
Great. Thanks for doing that, Alex. And thank you all for all of your work. And so you have my written comments. I just wasn't sure if those were sent out. So I wanted to just briefly make a comment here. So I've been a super host for over 2 years with Airbnb. I rent out the basement. I have 2 rooms and a full basement. And I'd been renting those out separately for those 2 years. I didn't realize I was not in compliance with the zoning laws. And so I was told by excise and licensing that I was not in compliance. And so I immediately brought myself into compliance. I shut down one of the rooms. But what I'm saying, what I would like the committee to know is that I am semi-retired and my husband and I rely on this income. Most hosts will tell you if I rent out the whole thing, I don't get as much money as if I rent them out separately, each room I'm talking about. And the idea of me going by myself as a single host to the zoning board is a bit frightening, and I feel like they're all powerful and I just have no voice with this. I was told that the zoning, the thought behind that zoning is that the regulation that you can't rent out, more than one room separately in your home is that they don't want people to turn their homes into hotels or hostels. And I have no intention of doing that. I just want to be able to rent out my 2 rooms separately and not be sideways with the zoning board, but I don't know how to go about doing that. I feel like I'm, one little person fighting City Hall. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only host that's in this position. And so I just would like some help on my behalf and any other host who is running afoul of these zoning laws. And again, I want to be compliant. I just need that income in order to make my mortgage.
Thank you, Stephanie. So in regards to your specific situation, you continue to email me and we can discuss, but obviously it would be up to the committee to discuss this issue as a policy issue and whether they would recommend any changes there. So thank you for your input, appreciate it. And next on the list we have Craig A. Burrell. Craig, are you able to take yourself off of mute?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Craig, and your 2 minutes begin now.
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate that. And I have a couple concerns like the prior speaker. I'm a senior citizen here in Denver. I'm a homeowner and I need the rental income to keep up with the mortgage. My taxes and fees have increased this year along with all the other homeowners. My utilities have gone up significantly this year, and it's expensive. So it's important to me that the EXL department is responsive, doesn't take 2 weeks to get back to me, processes the applications expeditiously, is transparent and open about all of these things that we've heard. And that's something I hope the department will work on going forward. Transparency is essential. And just to hear too many stories about people being denied for no reason or pending for months and months. I don't understand why somebody who's had a license should be pending for 3 months. Doesn't make any sense. So that aside, the other challenge here in Denver is, well, there's more vacancies, more inventories came on this year. There's been some good news. Rent rates are down. Vacancies are up. Unsold properties are up. 10,000 new housing units came on last year, 10,000 more coming on this coming year. And our rentals are softening. I don't know whether it's the national economy, but my room is not booked the way it used to be booked. I used to have people who would come and, probably just to get pot and smoke here. And now I don't seem to see that crowd anymore. It's kind of interesting. I don't know whether, I know marijuana prices have crashed in the state. They're down about 50%. Other states have begun licensing. Maybe Denver is losing some of its tourism zip. People not coming for whatever reason, I don't know. But it's a concern, and I hope that in the future, the city is aware that demand is softening here in Denver. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate your comments. Next up, we have, is it Irina? Irina, can you take yourself off mute?
Yes, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak here. And
Sure,
good
we'll start your
afternoon,
2
everyone.
minutes right now. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah. My question is similar to along the lines of the previous speakers that expressed their concern about the definition around the primary residency. There are numerous situations where people don't, they're not at their primary residence. And so now they're excluded from this opportunity to participate and be compliant with the city and in a short-term rental model. So my license, I applied for a license in October last year, and it's still pending. And now I'm required to have some sort of affidavit where I basically, I don't know, establish that I do go back to my home, that it's got my furniture, it's got my stuff in there. I do want to have my home. It is my primary residence for all sense of purposes, my taxes, everything is registered to there. I work there, and just happened that my situation right now, and the mountains, in working from home, and I want, just for sanity's sake, I stepped out of the city, and would like to rent my home, and I haven't been able to do that. So my question is, how can I get past this? Do I need a different license? Do I need to move all my furniture and put it in storage? Do I need to vacate my house? I'm kind of falling into the cracks, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. So for individual situations, again, email myself or the licenses at denvergov.org or for your particular situation. But again, appreciate your comments and glad that the committee has an opportunity to hear them. Thank you, Irina.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
And I see that we're at time, so I just want to wrap up with a couple of things. If you have an individual question about your individual application, licenses at denvergov.org is the fastest way to get a response. That will absolutely be the fastest. If you have input on the STRAC agenda or ideas or topics, those you can email directly to Alex. But in order to ensure that we're tracking all of the questions we get and making sure that we are keeping a, as many people have asked, a transparent record of the requests we get, if you've got a specific question about your license, that will go to licenses at denvergov.org. A couple of other points just from several of the comments that I want to close with. One, if someone is denied, they will receive notice of exactly why they are denied. An extensive order of denial is always issued explaining exactly the reason why that application was denied. So there should not be any denials that are issued for no reason. I just want to make that clear. Second, there is an appeal process. If you believe you've been denied in error, it is not a judgment about where you call your home. It is simply an assessment of the ordinance definition of primary residence, which is a requirement for licensure. Does not mean we think you don't love Denver. So I want to make that very clear as well. If you think that the decision was wrong, you can appeal that through our process, and we have information about those hearings. Finally, I would like to say that, we do appreciate all of the feedback and we do like to hear these things. That said, our average processing time for most applications is 7 days or less. So if you have questions about what you need to submit with your application or how to better prepare, let us know and we can add that as an educational topic for a future session. And maybe that will help maybe go through some of the discussions that we had a few years ago when we adopted the changes to the ordinance to make it clearer about primary residence and how those are approved or denied. So I just wanted to touch on some of those high level things. As we close the meeting, I know we're over time, so I don't want to talk too much longer, but thank you to all of our public commenters for sharing your stories and your impact. Finally, we do not blackball anybody, so free speech is a thing. If you want to share your story, you're not put on any list. Alex and I do not handle compliance. We are here to facilitate conversations and make programmatic and policy changes. So those two parts of the shop are separate. So anyone who would like to tell their story is welcome to join. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Erica. And along the same lines, I do want to respect everybody's time. If folks have to jump off, particularly the committee members, this is an ongoing conversation. So if there's further discussion that will take place in the next meeting, we can do that. But I do want to respect everybody's time so that nobody misses anything that's being discussed in the meeting. So I will go ahead and close out the meeting here. I appreciate everybody staying on a few extra minutes, and we'll be here for any questions, comments, and input as always. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Erica.